I can barely hold it together, seeing so many of you here. This was a crazy idea that, well, you can tell I can barely hold it together. This is a crazy idea that I had, I can't remember how long ago now, I suppose somewhere near the beginning of this year. I suggested to a couple of mates, one of whom is Phil Lorne, who you'll hear from later on today and again tomorrow, and another one of whom is Gabrielle Bond, who has done, in her spare time, without a cent of payment, hundreds of hours to make this happen. So, I'm not going to talk to you for very long. Some of you from Adelaide have been to talks I've given in the past on economics, on various issues. I'm not going to talk very much about economics at all. I'm going to very soon pass the baton on to one of the people I think is one of the greatest economists in the world. I'm not going to introduce him myself. I'm going to allow a family member of his to introduce him. We have some brilliant economists and others to engage with us over the next 3 days, and I'm immensely grateful to them. I'm also immensely grateful that we have with us, if it's all right to say this, I hope he doesn't mind, the greatest living Australian economist, certainly the greatest one from Adelaide, which is Geoffrey Harcourt, who's sitting in front of us at the moment here. I'd like to thank all the volunteers, and of course especially Gabby, but most of all I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'm really very grateful and overwhelmed. If you are from interstate or overseas, you're in Adelaide at obviously a very unusual and dreadful time for Australia as a whole, but it's incredibly unusual in the sense that when you get a southerly wind in Adelaide, we normally have the cleanest air in the world. I used to commute from here to London and back, and I'd get home and I'd, having polluted my lungs with London rush hour air for months at a time, I'd breathe in a deep breath as soon as I got back to Adelaide. You must have noticed outside, now I guess if you're from Sydney, as some of you are, you're used to this, but it's really only come in the last couple of days with a change in the wind. You must have noticed outside the smoke, and what you're breathing in out there, and again I'm going to lose it now, is the destruction of Kangaroo Island. The jewel in the crown for this state, ecologically speaking. One of the jewels in the crown for this whole country is burning at the moment. There's all sorts of statistics I could throw at you. More than half the population of koalas on that island have gone, and if, as seems likely, we're going to have events like this, or events that are more severe than this, more frequently in the future, it may never recover. So surely now, and I've got some slides, but I might not even use them, we'll see. Surely at this point in history, right now, is the right moment for us to try and shift the national conversation in this country, isn't it? Yes. It's time to rethink our attitude as a nation, not just to climate breakdown, but to ecological sustainability more generally. But we have to go further than that. We have to rethink our attitude to social justice, to all the social injustices that have been done in this country over a long, not just in this country either, internationally over a long period of time, and to our whole approach to managing our economy. And that's what this conference is all about. So I've asked the leading macroeconomists in the world, and if you're not a modern monetary theorist, then I won't be calling you one of the leading macroeconomists in the world. And they couldn't all come, but we've done pretty well, really. We've got Professor William Mitchell, who was the person that I was mentioning before. Later on this afternoon, you're going to meet Professor Stephanie Kelton. Warren Mosler also has been very supportive of the conference, and I know that Bill is going to be playing part of a conversation that he had recently with Warren, and you'll be able to go online later and watch the whole conversation if you haven't done that already. We have Robert Costanza from ANU, who is one of the world's leading ecological economists, taking part in this conference. And I know that's important to a lot of you. It's important to me as well. We have a videoed interview, edited very inexpertly by me, but remember, I'm an amateur. Be nice to me. At least I'm an amateur where these things are concerned, but we'll do the best we can. We have a videoed interview with Herman Daly. Now, just as Bill is one of the people that you might say invented or developed modern monetary theory, Herman Daly is one of the people who you might say developed or invented ecological economics all those years ago. These really are the most important names in their fields, and we need to listen to them all and to engage with them all, but not just them either. We've got there are many other speakers. I'm not going to start listing them because I'll start missing people out if I do that. Maybe I will just flick through a slide or two. Thanks, Coco. That's the name of the conference. Oh yeah. We've done this with no funding. We've not taken any money from anyone, except, of course, we've had some funding because you've all been kind enough to contribute towards the costs of the conference. Paul was quite right. I was going to say some of the things he said, but he says them much better than me. We do have a slight deficit because I didn't think we'd get more than 100 people, really, and we thought, OK, we'll take a small loss to have a conference with 100 people because we didn't want people who were on low incomes or unemployed not to be able to come. And we do need to feed you during the conference. The university's given us the room for nothing. Oh, one thing I should say, I would like to add what Paul said. If, as I know there are one or two people this is true of, if you're diabetic, then please just ignore what we said about not bringing food into the room. That's absolutely fair. And good, but as far as the rest of us, are concerned, my book's not about a Green New Deal, and it's not the world's greatest book ever. But there are copies of it available. You could buy outside. Any proceeds from that will, and this was the point of the sentence I started some time ago. Any proceeds that we get from that will go towards reducing the losses on the conference. That would be absolutely great. If anybody wants me to sign one, I'm quite happy to do that as well. I've said on the slides, this conference is about tipping points and it's about challenges. Now, we can get very depressed if we dwell on ecological tipping points all the time. So I'm not talking about that kind of tipping point here. I'm talking about a tipping point, as I said before, in the national narrative. And our challenge is to force them to listen. Look at how many of us are here. Our challenge is to force the politicians to take climate breakdown seriously, and to take inequality seriously, and to take full employment seriously. And this conference is an attempt by a pair of amateurs, basically Gabby and me, to push the narrative at least slightly. So please enjoy the next few days. Take from them whatever you can. That photo on the left is a picture out of my bedroom window. I live in the Adelaide Hills. Anyone else live in the Adelaide Hills here? Do you feel like me? You're not sure whether it's going to be safe in the future? And of course, we give our condolences to those people. There might be some people in this room this is true of, who've lost their homes in the fires that we've had in the Adelaide Hills already this summer, and it's only January. I couldn't help looking out of the window, looking at my pet koala going up and down one of the trees, and thinking about Kangaroo Island and thinking about that wonderful ecological resource which is just being frittered away at the moment. And yeah, I've been on climate protests. I didn't make the banner. Somebody else kindly did that for me. She might be in this room, but I've been on climate protests and I've listened to young people giving great, inspiring speeches full of anguish and anger. And actually that was one of the things that made me think about having this conference too, because I wanted to empower them. I wanted to empower myself, because there's lots that I'm going to learn over the next few days. The more we know, the more empowered we are, the more we're in a position not just to protest, as people will be outside Parliament House, quite rightly, this afternoon, but actually to suggest an alternative to the way in which we are operating our economy and we are ignoring our ecosystem, which will resonate with people and which might actually lead to some politicians at some point in the foreseeable future in this country being elected to power and doing something about it. I mean, they ought to think about changing their attitude, shouldn't they? Because, of course, that's Canberra, that's Parliament House in the background behind that BBC reporter recently. Why should we be leading the world in the fight against climate breakdown? Of course we should. Morality is the first reason. What do I mean by morality? Amongst all the OECD countries, we have the highest carbon emissions per capita, the highest per capita of any of the rich countries in the world in the OECD club. And that's before you take our fossil fuels exports into account. That's based on what we consume, basically, not what we produce. Threats. We're under more threat from climate breakdown, clearly, than many countries around the world. So it's in our narrow self-interests to adopt a different approach to thinking about these issues. And opportunities too, as everybody knows. We've got immense opportunities to move quickly towards renewable energy and then away from a reliance on fossil fuels to power our economy. If we can't do it in Australia, then who can do it? We know the sorts of things that we need to plan for: sustainable energy, land use, transportation. Well, I won't read them all. They're obvious, really, when you think about it, and we're not doing very much of any of those things. But when we're talking about social justice, then there are other issues which are also important. Eliminating involuntary unemployment with all the consequences that go with it, particularly for young people. Inequality has been rising in Australia, inexorably really, since about 1974, when that happened to be the last year when there was full employment in Australia. I walk by homeless guys on Rundle Street, maybe you do, a couple of them that I know. Why in a country like Australia is housing not a right? Excellent public services, economic security for all. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do all that stuff? It's because we've fallen for an economic narrative which is based on myths. Myths which serve the interests of particular interest groups in our society. Myths which form the basis of what people sometimes call neoliberalism, or what one of the authors I'm going to interview tomorrow morning, Cameron Murray, has called a game of mates. The big game of mates in Australia, where wealth is sucked from the bottom up to the top. That economist is a gentleman, actually a friend of Jeff Harcourt, called Hyman Minsky. Minsky died in 1996. In a book he published in 1986, he was a good one for quotes. That quote leapt off the page at me the first time I read it. The game of policy making is rigged. The prince is constrained by the theories of intellectuals. Yes, if you are on the conservative side of politics, actually, let me use the word, neoclassical frame for thinking about economic policy serves your interest. You're naturally going to choose that approach. But a tragedy, in my view, is that people on the progressive side of politics, not just in Australia but around the world, have used the same advisors, basically, used the same approach to thinking about economics and economic management for 30 years, 40 years. And they've been constrained. Basically, they've used the approach to thinking about the economy and describing economic options which the Conservatives have used, and that's why they've lost a lot of the time, and even when they've won, they've lost, because they've not been able to make the changes that we need to make when they're in power, because they've been constrained by the theory of their intellectuals, you might say. The guy on the right is in the video with Bill that you're going to see in a moment. Warren Mosler, that's not from something he wrote, I don't think. I think it was from an interview I heard him give. The progressives. Lack of understanding of the monetary system has been the worst enemy of the progressive agenda. This is, I think, what Bill Mitchell will be talking to us about in a few minutes, or at least it's related to it, because we need to rethink the role of the government in our economy, in economic management, in moving towards a future of, yes, sustainable prosperity, ecological sustainability and social justice. And that means we need to think much more carefully about the appropriate role for the government budget, for the federal government budget, for the fiscal balance in economic management. That's something we're going to be talking about. Actually, sometimes politicians say things which, if you just were to take them a little bit out of context, would make sense, even though the politicians perhaps don't make all that much sense themselves most of the time and don't even understand what they're saying sometimes. Mr. Morrison, a couple of days ago on the ABC News, when of course talking about the bushfires, claimed the surplus is of no focus to me. We'll make every investment that needs to be made. Imagine if he said that under other circumstances, in a different context, because actually it's the right thing to say. I don't want to start getting into Bill Mitchell's talk, so I'll let him explain that. I'm not going to explain that. I will say, and don't get me wrong, listen very carefully to when Professor Mitchell is speaking, but our government, with our monetary system, genuinely cannot run out of money. It cannot run out of its own currency. Once you understand this, it's not a recipe for limitless spending, but it does make you completely rethink economic management and how our economy ought to be organised, and how you might want to go about planning for a just transition or a Green New Deal or whatever else you want to call it, a rose by any other name, and all that. If it isn't about the money, what is it all about? I'll let somebody else answer that question. If Scott Morrison, if someone wanted to start planning for a future of ecological sustainability and social justice, where should he start? Sorry about the typo. That was the question that I wanted this conference to be about. And I don't need to go through all this stuff really, because Paul already did. But you're going to hear some things, you're probably going to hear some things during this conference which don't match up to your preconceptions sometimes, or which seem a little bit counterintuitive. But we all have stuff to learn. We're all wrong sometimes. I'm wrong a lot of the time. So if we can leave our preconceptions at the door, if we can not jump to conclusions about what a particular speaker is saying, without just taking a while to step back and think about things carefully, rather than just relying on instinct. Yes, Paul said, if we can show courtesy and respect for all, of course. I hope we're all going to have some new thoughts over the next 3 days. I hope I'm going to have some new thoughts over the next few days. I hope we're going to build new connections between different thoughts or different issues. I hope that we're going to build some bridges, and I hope that you're going to feel enthused, empowered, you're going to want to find out more. When I say join the team, join a team anyway, whether we're talking about ecological justice, social justice, whether you want to join or form a Modern Money Australia group in Adelaide or elsewhere in the country. I hope we're going to engage. There is going to be a little bit of education. But I hope it's going to be fun. I hope you're going to be entertained. I hope we're going to feel some enlightenment. I hope everybody is going to go away enthusiastic to meet the challenge. Because there's no point just thinking, let's fiddle while Rome burns. Let's just ignore the situation that exists at the moment, and let's ignore the changes that have to happen in economics as a discipline as well. I hope you're going to feel empowered. And here we go. I would like to apologise in advance. As and when it doesn't all run smoothly, please bear in mind, this has been organised largely by two people. I'm one of them. But the dynamo, as some of you know, the amazing dynamo that's Gabrielle Bond, the queen of organising, has really made all this possible.